Thanks all for joining in. I see some people are still joining in, so it's not too late. Good time to join. Um, so thanks for joining in on a Sunday. So I really appreciate it. Let's get started with, first of all, who am I? So for those of you who have not met me in person, I'm Akshit. I've done my master's in engineering and management from MIT's System Design and Management program. I did my computer science from India from a university called Punjab Engineering College. I have over a decade of experience in innovation and entrepreneurship. Most of it from Amadeus, where I built prototypes, engaged with startups, was a developer advocate, explored emerging technologies. So yeah, bunch of different hats that you wear as an innovation professional. On the fun side, I've lived in 5 countries. I love to travel. I love to dance. I love to explore different cultures. And I have a special emphasis or liking towards social entrepreneurship. Now, on the flip side, in the audience, we have a very good mix of people who are exploring ideas, as well as some of you are already working on a specific idea. So that's a good mix of the audience. And on the expertise side, as I just mentioned, we have a lot of folks with business and operations background. And some of you also have sales and marketing and tech experience. On an average, for those of you who filled the years of experience, which most of you did, we have 18 years of experience in the audience. So that's a good thing. So my objective today is to make you feel comfortable, especially if you're a non-tech founder, to go out of this session and feel empowered to be able to get started, right? So a lot of times I've been in many conversations with non-tech aspiring entrepreneurs who are just not able to take that first step because they feel having a tech co-founder is an absolute necessity. I think having a co-founder is good, especially with complementary skill sets, but that should not stop you from getting started. And that's my objective for non-tech audience for in today's session. I want to make sure that after this session, you should be comfortable getting started. Couple of logistics items. So this session is being recorded, and I will be sharing the link after the session. Please do raise your hands if you have an urgent question. Although this is a very tightly packed masterclass because I'm trying to do everything in 1 hour. Please be aware of that. So if there's a question that can be taken at the end, I'll just pass it for later. But if you have a burning question, please feel free to raise your hands and then I can pitch in. I will be sending links in the chat. So those of you who are connecting through the computer, that's great because we'll keep it interactive, and there's a couple of exercises that all of you will be doing. And if you have any feedback, don't let it wait. Feel free to send a private DM to me or even in the chat, just so that you can just put it out of your mind as soon as you have it. I've put a couple of symbols throughout the presentation to guide you on what to expect on the slide. So a sticky note in yellow represents, okay, this is just an informational slide. There's something to learn out of this, but you don't have to do anything. There's the activity sticker that tells you, okay, you should be going on to the workbook, which I'll be sharing the link of at the relevant time, and you should be working on that workbook. Then lastly, the time being of the essence, I have some things that I'll demo and we won't be able to do it live. But yeah, please be aware that this symbol represents that I'm just demoing and you don't really have to copy or do the same thing or follow me. All right. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So first things first, for those of you who are exploring ideas, please be aware that quantity is actually good at this point, right? So all of those ideas that you're coming up with, please keep a note of them. Please have somewhere where you're parking all of these ideas. And as they come, you're not letting them just fly away with just a quick thought, with a quick reasoning why it's not a good idea, right? So keep note of all of those ideas. It's an iterative process. You're going to come back. Now, few of these ideas that you want to go further and deeper dive into, please look at them in three aspects. First of all, the solution, what your idea is, but also the problem and the target segment, right? Who you're solving a problem for, what is the problem and what is the solution. Again, very high level, but these three aspects sort of really are needed to define an idea or build it further, right? Then out of those, just pick one and start working on them, right? So it's okay to already have some holes in your ideas, but you got to just pick one and get started. And then, as I said, it's an iterative process. You will come back to this ideas board. So just get started with one and then keep coming back. So if you're in an idea exploration stage right now, I am going to post a link in the chat where I've posted some ideas that you can work on for this session. So please feel free to pick up any idea from there. All right. Moving forward. So once you have that idea that you want to start working on, before going into investing time on an MVP or anything, please validate that idea. Now, how can you validate that idea? Do some market research, do some desk research, go online, look for market reports, look for policy updates, look for macro trends that sort of align with your idea, but also go against your idea, right? So be aware of those. Just by finding one thing that doesn't align with your idea doesn't mean that you should not be working on that, but being aware deeply about the idea is really important. Now that's the macro level. Go a little bit, the next step is go micro, right? Note that you've identified the target audience. Go to the target audience and try to understand what their problem is in the context of the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So do they really mention that problem to you? Is this a problem perceived by them as you see it or not, right? Sometimes they may list 10 different problems and they are all connected to that problem, but they don't explicitly mention that. So that's a very key insight before you start building anything, right? And then finally, if possible, just make a landing page and see how you can get people to join the wait list, or click on the call to action button. But these are all different iterations to again validate the idea. The way I look at it is, imagine, just keep in your mind like what your hourly cost is right now. So what your current employer is paying, or maybe your previous employer was paying if you're working full time on the idea, right? So imagine, let's say it's $100. Would you spend $500 on a whim? Probably not, right? You'd think you'll do your due diligence before you actually spend $500. So before spending those 5 hours on building an MVP, please go in and think about, do your due diligence, try to understand why that's a good idea. You should be spending your 5 hours on, etc. Right? So the $500 is just a figure to give the idea, but please be aware that it's very important to iterate on the idea. Now, the next thing is, you must have heard a lot of different terms out there: proof of concept, prototype, MVP. What is that? What is the difference, right? So in my decade of experience, what I've seen is people use these terms interchangeably depending on the context. So it's really hard to kind of know what's for what. This is my understanding. So please take it with a grain of salt. But if you're trying to prove feasibility, that your idea is actually possible, then I'd say that's a proof of concept. So you're not really putting this in the hands of your users, but this is just to say, okay, this idea can be implemented in some fashion, right? So that's the proof of concept. Now, a prototype is really useful asset for communicating your idea to others, right? So for example, it could be a video, it could be a mock-up. Doesn't have to be functional, just able to communicate what your concept is, what your idea is with the audience or whoever you're trying to explain it to. Now, the minimum viable product is, the purpose of that is to get iterative feedback from your users and improve the product until you find until you make a product that your users really love, right? So that's the purpose of an MVP. So if that's what you're trying to do, please go ahead and build the MVP. But if there's any of the other reasons, then maybe MVP is not the right thing for you to be doing. All right. One last thing before we actually go into doing exercises. So there is something called deep tech, right? So what that means is there are some use cases where you actually do need technical expertise, and you may not be able to, make progress without that. So one example is blockchain solutions, right? So if you're trying to make a blockchain app, or an application, and then you go out and try to build an MVP which does not work on top of blockchain, that's a bit of misleading, right? So that's where you probably do need somebody to kind of help you on the technical side. But often what I've noticed is that most people don't really need that kind of deep tech expertise, or tech expertise to start with. So in the context of non-tech audience, like, what is deep tech anyway, right? So hopefully by the end of this session, you should be able to feel comfortable being able to work on your ideas without having that tech expertise. But again, having somebody with technical background to at least talk to and give you some feedback that yes, you may need a technical co-founder for this, versus you can do this MVP without a tech co-founder, it really helps. And that's where I will quickly plug my startup that I'm working on, where I pair solo founders working on their own ideas, but with complementary skill sets. So for the non-tech solo founders out there, I'll connect you to a tech solo founder so that you can have weekly check-in calls and get some valuable feedback and advice, right? Similarly, on the tech founder side, they're going to learn a lot from you. So there's a value exchange that I see that's going to happen, and that's what I do at Founderverse. All right, enough of talking. Let's actually get into the exercise mode, right? So we'll start working on the MVP right away. And let me share a link of the workbook with you all. So, so please go to this link and make a copy of this Google Slides, so that you can work on it on your own computers. Um, can anyone confirm in the chat that you're able to copy the workbook, make a copy of it? Okay, I guess it works. Copy. Awesome. Thanks, Ashish. Thanks for confirming that. All right. So the first step there is pretty straightforward, right? Let's scope down what you're trying to achieve with your idea, right? So what is the problem? What is the solution? So there's this framework called the systems problem statement, and the structure is two by using. So let's just write down what you're trying to achieve. So what, for example, in my case, what I'm trying to achieve is this: to help solo founders get professional advice for free by connecting solo founders with complementary skill sets, right? So leave the using part for now, because that's what we're working on in this session anyway. But the reason of doing this is to kind of scope down what you're trying to do in this masterclass. And then, of course, if you have any ideas, there's a last slide in this deck, which is a features parking lot, right? So if you come up with any ideas during the session, please park your ideas here. But for this session, we're going to just work on this scope. So I'll give you all, let's say, a few seconds to be done with this. All right. So I hope you're done. Even if you're not, it's okay. But let's just keep moving on because there's a lot to cover. Um, So the next step, right after you've done the systems problem statement, is the functional decomposition. So what that really means is that notice the solution part, the buy part of your systems problem statement, and let's break it down into a flow chart, right? So what does the order of things look like when your users are going to be using the solution? So please break down the flow of things as you imagine in your idea, in your solution, in a flow chart. So I can give you an example. So in my case, I've put down things like founder comes to the platform, founder fills in information about themselves, AI finds a match for them. If match is found, founder sees the match, and so on, right? So just break down your solution into this flow chart. I'll give you again a few seconds to work on that. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hands. Now I know this exercise needs a little bit more than 30 seconds, but again, just for the sake of this exercise, let's keep moving. And I hope you have at least 3 or 4 or 5 of these functions in your flow chart. If you need more time, can you say that in the chat, or it's okay to move on? Let me give 15 more seconds. All right, let's keep moving then. So next step is for each of those functions in the flowchart, identify who's responsible for doing what, right? So for some of those things in your flowchart, you will have the user who is responsible for doing those. Some of them are supposed to be done by a solution, and maybe there's some other stakeholder that needs to do that activity, right? So for example, again, in my case, I'm going to get rid of those extra use cases or scenarios for the sake of this exercise. So in my case, founder is coming to the platform, founder is filling the information about themselves, but the system is actually finding a match for them, right? So just put these kind of stakeholders right next to each of the ovals, or the functions as we call it in the systems world, so that you're able to identify who's doing what. This should be a quick one. All right, so let's move on to the next step. Which is putting a system boundary. Now, identify the things that are supposed to be done by your system and put a boundary around them. And please notice that I have those things that those symbols, extra symbols, and items you need on the top right of the second slide. So hopefully you can use those. But let me give you an example. So in my flowchart, these 3 things are being done by the system, right? So I've just put them on the side and put a boundary around them. So just to kind of show you the difference. So just put a boundary around them to identify which of these things are being done by the system versus the users. All right, this is a quick one. So let's just move to the next slide. And now please carefully notice the things that are inside the boundary are things that your user is probably not going to see, right? They do care that it happens, but they don't really care how it happens, right? So let's call it the backend, and we'll come back to that in some time. But more importantly, observe the things that are supposed to be done by your users and interact with something that's within the boundary, right? So I've here marked these things in yellow. So these yellow things or functions are something that your user is supposed to do but are interacting with your system, right? So we call them interfaces in the systems world because this is really where your user interfaces with the system internally, right? So yeah, for the sake of this exercise, I would encourage you to just put mark them as yellow, and I've also mark the backend functions in gray in this slide. All right, moving on. I hope there's no question at this point. Okay, I don't see any questions. So moving on, now let's take a deeper dive into the interfaces, right? Those yellow bubbles in our diagram so far. Let's go deeper into them because that's really where the user actually interacts with your solution, right? So first things first, identify some existing technology that you can leverage to sort of outsource some of these yellow functions to. So for example, if there's something that requires calendar scheduling, why don't you use Calendly for that? Or if you have something that needs data collection, why don't you use a Google form or a Jot form or Typeform for that, right? Similarly, video conferencing, you could use Zoom, Google Meet. For AI, you could use ChatGPT, Cloudy, etc. So identify opportunities to outsource some of those things that you have to do to existing technology. So for example, in my case, I say, maybe I could take the founder's information in a Google form, and maybe I can get the availability of the founders in when to meet. So think about which existing technologies you could use that you use it probably in your daily lives, and you can outsource those primary functions to. We're really focusing on the primary functions at this point. This slide, I'll give you probably 30 seconds to think about. Yeah, while you're doing that, also remember that there's a small caveat that when your users are going to be experiencing your MVP, if you're outsourcing something to an external technology, then probably they're not going to be able to see your logo, your branding on that part of your user experience, right? So be aware of that. Honestly, at this stage for an MVP, the users that you're working with, going to be working with, are early adopters, and they're much more forgiving for people for you to be using external technology. But if this is something that you really care about, then maybe this is not what you really want to do. All right. Next up is for the yellow bubbles or functions that don't have any external technology assigned so far, there's going to be one of two types. Either they're going to be primary functions where you're really delivering the core value proposition of your company, of your startup, or there's going to be secondary functions, things like sign up or authentication or payments, etc. Right? So in my case, for example, I'm in my case, for example, there's only one yellow bubble left, and that's really sort of a part of the primary function where I'm showing them who the founder they have matched with. But yeah, in your case, you may have some other yellow bubbles, and then you may want to mark them as secondary or primary, depending on your use case. I'm going to move quickly to the next slide from here because that's really the most time consuming activity that you need to do. So for each of those functions, primary and secondary functions, let's identify the flow of your user experience, right? In terms of the pages that you need to implement. So for example, in my case, I'm going to have a to show the match that they have seen, I'm going to have firstly a page where they fill in their information. I'm going to have a page where they see the founder's information that they've been matched with, and then I'm going to have where a page where they sign up to get connected with the founder, right? So then after identifying each of the pages, go deeper and try to understand what functionalities do you want on each of these pages. So for example, on the fill information page, I want to take information from them. So there's going to be a detailed form. But there's also going to be a reminder of the immediate value proposition, because just for my use case, I need this kind of a functionality here. Similarly, to see the match the page that shows them the match, they're going to have information regarding the match, but they're also going to be able they're also going to have an option to rematch with someone, and they're also going to have some call to actions that I want, right? So similarly, for the sign up page, they're just going to have the sign up form. But then next up, what components, UI components you want. So for the details form, what does it look like? How many fields do you want? What are those fields? So that's the next step. And then finally, what is the specific element, UI element you want? You want text boxes, you want buttons, etc., right? So at this time, let's just not get into the exercise mode, because this is going to take a lot of time and deep thinking about. On your case, whenever you're doing this exercise, for each of those functions, identify what the pages are, what the functionalities are, what UI components look like on for that, and then what are the UI elements, the most basic level. Okay. Any questions? All right, cool. So next thing is, for each of those functions, you have a different small set of flows, right? So let's connect them. Let's make an entire flow of all the pages. So in my case, for example, this is how the page flow navigation is going to look like, right? So there's a landing page. These are the three functions from this these are the three pages from the primary function that we just talked about. So fill in information page, see match page, sign up to get connected page, right? And then how does it fit in around the other pages that we defined for the other primary and secondary functions? So great. At this point, you know which pages are going to be there in your app, and you know what those pages have and how they're all connected. So that's amazing, right? Now, one last thing is to identify the data structures for your app, right? So now that you know which page has what sort of information, you can use that piece of information to drill down into a data structure. So in my case, I want to store the stage of startup, skill set, and years of expertise about a person. So that's going to be a user's data structure, user's data element, right? But not only this, in the next stages, I want to store their career highlights also, right? So that also goes into the same data structure. Then I also want to store their name and email. So that goes into the next data structure. So the point here is that based on each of your pages, you can identify what your data structure overall looks like. So what are the data elements? And then within those, what are you storing for each of those? So in my case, for this particular example and exercise, there's only one, which is the users table, but you may have other structures like matchups or whatever, depending on your use case, right? So congratulations. I mean, at this point, you basically have all the pages and what there is inside them. You have a high level navigation, and you have the data structure for your app. So that's basically really what you need to go ahead and start building. Now, at this point, you could decide to either build it yourself or go ahead and get somebody to build it for you. Not necessarily a tech co-founder, but just an outsourced developer. I highly encourage you to do it yourself. And there's three reasons for that. First of all, when you're so deeply involved in the development of the things from the ground up, you're more familiar with the micro level decisions that you make. It's a very small and sort of a cliche example, but when you were putting up that button, what was the roundedness of that button, or what was the color? Now, this is a very micro level decision that you make, but because you implement it yourself, you may be able to make a hypothesis that perhaps your conversion is low because that's something, right? And not only that, once you realize that you want to do this kind of an experimentation and see how it changes the user behavior, you can actually just go in and make that change within a matter of minutes, rather than going to the developer or designer, communicating it to them, and then going through a couple of iterations and so on, right? So that just takes a lot of time. Whereas now, when you've built it something from ground up, you can actually experiment it yourself, and make those changes and experiment. Now, one last benefit of doing it yourself is that later on, when you're actually going to go to a development team to develop it, or have a technical co-founder or something, you're going to be able to communicate this to your to the concerned person much more deeply, and with special depth in your information, right? So you're not going to be able to they're not going to be able to fool you, or just the fact that this is going to take so much time and all that. Because you're so deeply involved, you're much more aware of what needs to be done, and you can communicate that more efficiently. All right, moving on. So now you know what needs to be done. Let's try and think about how you're going to implement it, right? So this is a very crucial step. And again, as you can see, I have the plug for my startup, where having a technical person to talk to and get advice is helps. But in general, we're obviously going to talk about low code, no code tools here. My goal is to make sure that you feel comfortable that at the end of this session, you can go in and build your MVP. Now, there are two approaches that you can take. Depending on your use case, there may be some no code, low code tools that specifically are designed for that category of use case. So for example, if you're trying to make an e-commerce store, you could go for Shopify. If you're trying to build a digital assets sort of e-commerce store, you could go to Gumroad or Payhip. So depending on the use case, there are some use case specific no code tools out there. But then there's also those generic tools out there which you can build any application on top of, right? Now, within those, there's two categories. One is you could use a tool like a Bubble or Webflow that allow you to do everything within them. So the user interface, the database, the backend logic, business logic is everything within them. Or you could make a portfolio of different things. You can make a tech stack and say, okay, I'm going to do user interface in this tool, database in this tool, and the backend connectivity, etc., in another tool. So it's really up to you what you want to pick. But the question is, how do you pick that, right? So my hack is I go to their pricing pages and look at all the different features that are there for that in that specific tool, and I try to understand, looking at them, what is most important to me, and what is it something that I can let go for the sake of the MVP while I'm doing it myself, right? So for example, if you're going for convenience, if I'm going for convenience, I'd go for a one-stop shop like Bubble, and build my MVP on top of it, right? If I'm going, which I generally go for, my preferences are a free tool, a tool that offers a free tier, which has domain connectivity, right, within the free tier. So that for me is software, and I make a selection of software as a user interface. Because it doesn't have data storage, then I go for whatever data storage options they have. So in my case, they have Google spreadsheets, they have Airtable, and a couple more are coming up. So I go for Google spreadsheets, as simple as that. And then for the backend, I use some other tools. So this again, do your research, come up with a plan, and then go out and talk to somebody who has some technical expertise. Tell them your rationale, tell them what you're thinking about, and then just get some feedback. Maybe they have something else to add that maybe you want to consider, or just like having another person give you some advice on this topic can really save you a lot of time in the long run. Okay, moving on. Now that you have what you want to build, you know what you're going to build, the next step is development. Now, let me actually go right into the tool and show you how it's going to be built. So give me 1 second while I arrange my screens. Okay, awesome. All right, so let me go back to this sheet first, right? So this is what we're trying to build in terms of the data structure. And then this is how the pages look like, right? But for the sake of this exercise, let me just quickly implement this data structure and this page, just to show you like how straightforward and simple it is. So I'm going to choose on the technology side Google Spreadsheets, and I've already prepared the Google Spreadsheet for this because I felt like that's not something that's going to be really complicated for most of you to build. So I've created 2 sheets. You don't need to go, observe matches. I'll come back to that later. But there's the user sheet, and note that there's these stages of startup, skill set, experience in years, career highlights, name, and email as the features that I want in the data structure. And then again, I have stage of startup, skill sets, your experience in years, career highlights, name, and email in the same data in the Google spreadsheet, right? So that as simple as setting up a Google spreadsheet, that's what it is. Notice a couple of things that yes, I have all the titles in the first row, so I don't have any extra rows or columns at the end, but that's as straightforward as it is. Okay, now the next thing is going to the UI, right? So on the UI side, let's actually implement see the match page, right? So what I want them to see is information regarding the match and a couple of call to action buttons, right? So let's go in. As I said, I go to software. I like to use software. I've already logged in, and this is an empty workspace. So I currently have no applications, right? So let's start something from scratch. Now, how does this, from here, how simple it is. They already have an option to generate the app from the data structure that we have, right? So let's just pick that option and see what happens, right? So let's connect it to Google Sheets. I've already connected it. You can go ahead and add another source and pick one and all of that, but I've already done Google Sheets connection, right? Then which document I'm talking about, which document do I pick up? Do I want to work with? Where is my data structure saved? It's called Founder Connector App DB2. Okay, so that is not here already. So I'm going to add new file and look for that sheet. So let me just make sure that I have shared it with the right account. No, so just so what I'm doing right now is I'm sharing this file with akshay.ccouncil@gmail.com, which is the account that I've connected here. As you can see, akshay.ccouncil. So now let's refresh and see if my file shows up here. So hopefully this is the file that it is. I'm just waiting for. Okay, let me just select this and see. Yeah, so it shows up here. I'm going to pick this sheet, and here it already identified what sheets that I have. So I'm going to pick up the user sheet and then continue. Now, again, I'm going to pick the user sheet and connect it to the user's database. So one great thing about software is it already does the authentication piece within itself. So it has the ability to create users and manage login and authentication flows. So this is how it's asking me to connect that user sheet with the user's authentication module, right? So I'm going to connect email to email, name to name field, and then I don't have an avatar or magic link link. So I'm just going to leave it as is, right? So you can skip this as defaults. And that's it. So now it's actually generating the app, and this is how it looks like on the onset, right? So if you notice in the pages, it already has these two pages, which is like the home page where they have listed all the users, and then there's the user details page where they show specific information about a particular user, right? So this is just the default. We can change it as we move forward. But the rest of the pages are really about authentication. So reset password, sign in, sign up, forgot password, all of that. So don't worry about that too much right now. Let's just focus on this users details page, which sounds a lot like this page, the C matches page. So let's just go deeper into that, right? So once I have a match, this page is going to show me the information about that match. Now, one quick thing to note, you see this blue column that has automatically been generated. This is how software is connecting to this data source. So it's already here. You don't have to worry about anything. If you add a new row here, it'll automatically connect to the software. Software will automatically pick it up. All right, so let's get into this page. Now, there's already this block here, but just to show you like how to add a new block, so you can just click on the plus add block thing here, and then you can pick whatever block you want to show. So in this case, I think this block is this one. So they already, yeah, so this block and this block are fairly similar, but I'm not going to work on this block. Let's just use the one that they already created for us, right? So again, there's a couple of tabs. So first of all, source, which file is this page picking up the data from? So again, my Gmail account, my Google document name, and the sheet within that. I can also set filters of which user it wants to show. For now, I'm just going to leave it as is, and it's going to pick up whatever random user to show. And the next piece is content, right? So I'm going to say I want the name as the primary thing that I see. I don't want to see there. So yeah, so the name changes here. Then I want to see their skill set, which is sales and marketing, which is fine. And then they have another section, which, okay, experience in years, 1 to 5 years. Career highlights, maybe I want to see it at the end. I don't want to repeat the name, so let's just say I want to show their stage of the startup journey, right? And I don't want to show their email for privacy reasons, so I'm just going to remove that. So the point here is that data structure that you set is now already connected to this page, and you're able to set up the page as simple as just with a few click of buttons, right? The next thing that we want is the call to action, the ability to rematch, right? And that's the next tab here as well. So what actions do you want? So for example, here it's already pre-configured to be an edit record button. We don't want an edit record button, so let's delete that. We also want a delete button. So I'm going to add a button that, let's say, opens a new URL. So there's a lot of things that you can do here, but let's say you're going to open URL, and this is going to be pre-match button, right? So you can give whatever custom URL you want. Founderverse.online, I'll give it for now, just for the sake of this exercise, and so on, right? So I also want another button, which I want it to be, again, open URL, and it's going to be sign up or connect with them, right? Connect with the founder button. Again, you can do whatever. I'm going to say, I'm going to, again, just give founderverse.online for the sake of this activity, and that's it, right? So now you have these buttons, which are the call to actions. And then there's styling. You can do a lot of design with this. You can say, okay, I want the background to be red or whatever, and you can play around with these configurations. Button, you can style the button. Again, as I said, like you can have those rounded buttons, you can have those less rounded buttons, whatever, small size, large size. Just play around and see what you want to do. Visibility is for this particular block. depending on the user's authentication status, should they see this or not. So right now I've set it as all users, but it says, okay, page is only visible to login users. So at the page level, the visibility is set to only logged in users versus at the block level, it is set to all users. So their software is already telling me there's a conflict. So what I need to do now is for this page, I'm going to go to user details, settings, visibility, and then I'm going to say, okay, all users should be able to see this page and save it. So now that that thing is gone, and if you go to the preview mode, you will see details of Alex in the way we wanted it, right? So now a random record is showing. So at this point, you technically have a very, very, very bare bones web app with one page, which is showing the information about your match, right? And that's as far as I'm going to go in this masterclass. But the idea is, if you can make one, you can make multiple, right? Of course, the header needs some work and all of that. But let's get back to our presentation and move on. But at this point, does anyone have questions, just to make sure I'm... Does anyone feel lost? How's everyone feeling at this point? All right. So I noticed that we just have minutes left. I see some chat message. Let's see. Good. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Satya, for saying that. All right. So just a couple last few slides. Yes. So next thing, backend. Remember those bubbles that we were that we left, which were not a part of the interfaces, which were within our system? So what do we do with those? That's also really the most important piece, right? So as I said, like really your users don't really care how they operate, right? If you can do it manually, just go ahead and do it manually. Couple of few iterations manually will give you a lot of insights. But then let's say you want to automate them. There are tools like make.com. Sorry. There are tools like make.com that you can use. So let me just open that up, where you can set up very basic automations. So for example, I have a bunch of scenarios set up, but let's just create a new scenario, right? So what I want to do is, as soon as a new record shows up in the user's sheet, so watch for new records. I'm gonna select the file. This is shared with me. Pick up the db2 file, and then it picks up the data structure and says, okay, which sheet on the user's sheet, which rows have the headers. So A1 to F1, I'll say, have the headers. And then how many records do I want in each of the fetch when it makes a fetch? So, okay, 2. So where to start from? So let's just say it starts from the beginning, right? So what I'm trying to do here is automate that as soon as a user signs up or a new user shows up in the Google spreadsheet, it should match with another user within that spreadsheet, and then fill in the second sheet, which is as simple as user 1 and user 2, and says, okay, this new user should be matched with this particular person, right? So I'm just looking at the time and we're running out, but quickly. So this particular thing watches the new records. Now I'm gonna say find a record which it should match. So search rows, right? So again, for the same file. Yeah, in the same file, in the same sheet, look for, yeah, this is not important. Look for the, so what are we looking for, right? We want to match people with similar years of experience, right? So let's say 1 to 5 with 1 to 5 with 1 to 5, but then also at the same stage, right? So working on idea and working on idea. So this would be a good match, Mia and Olivia. Um, or let's look at the first two. So 10 to 20, 10 to 20, 10 to 20, tech. This we're not looking at, but working on idea, exploring ideas, and working on idea. So perhaps Ava and Zoe would be a good match, right? So what we want to do is years of experience and stage of startup, and of course the email should not be same, so they should not just match with themselves. So let's set those three constraints. So first of all, email is not equal to, so this is the column that we have selected, and is not equal to the email. So this is the data that has been fetched by the previous record, and you're just selecting that the find a row whose entry in the column field is not equal to the same as the one that is being fetched for that record, right? So similarly, I'm going to add, okay, same stage of the startup, same stage of the startup, and I'm going to say years in experience, right? So hopefully this should make, and I want just one record. So, okay. And once the record is identified, once the row is identified, I want that to be added um, to the matchup sheet, right? So again, look for the same file. Look for the same file. And so this time I'm going to add this new record, new match to the matches field. Now in this field, in the user one column, I want the output of this sheet. So as you can see, there are two of these, right? So the one that we're looking for, let's pick that email. And in the second column, let's fill in the other email that comes from this search thing. All right, and that's as simple as that. Let's press OK, save it, and hopefully when we run it, so it fetched two records, right? And it ran these twice. So let's go to the sheet and see in the matches sheet. So it picked up, the formatting is a little bit messed up, but it picked up Alex from the first column, but it did not really find anyone who's also in the same age bracket, experience bracket, and look at the same stage. So that's why it just filled in an empty column there. But for Ava, it found Zoe, as we had already discussed earlier also. So 10 to 20, 10 to 20, working on idea, and of course, they're not the same. All right, looking at the time quickly, this is how simple it is to kind of automate the backend things as well. And just to kind of wrap up quickly, the next thing that needs to be done is go out and test. Remember, the MVP is about iterating on your product so that you identify something that people love, right? So go out, test it with, first of all, test internally, go out and test it with users. And in software, it's very simple to create users, test users, and then just share some credentials with them. By the way, I pre-filled this sheet with Gemini generated data. So don't worry too much. Just for at least test purposes, you can generate data for using AI, right? So test to iterate, very important. Next thing, just don't overthink and over-engineer. Remember to take note of user feedback and iterate on it. And then do not forget what your end goal is, to make a product that people love. Lastly, let's just summarize the whole presentation. So firstly, we said, okay, note down all the ideas, as many as possible, but keep a track record of them because you're going to keep coming back. Then the other thing is iterate or validate your solution. Do some secondary market research, do some primary market research, do some landing page based sort of traction building, join a wait list kind of a thing, to just learn more about your users and your problems and their problems, right? Then scope up your solution by identifying the to and the by part of the system's problem statement. Then go deeper into the solution, break down different functions, and then overall make a front end structure, right? What are the pages? What are the functionalities? Which pieces of it are you outsourcing to other technologies, etc., right? And then finally identify the data structure based on your page structure, right? So at this point, you should have all that you need to build a solution or get it built. Then do some tech selection, identify which pieces of no-code tools that you want to use. Good to have a tech person kind of give you some feedback on this. But yeah, you can actually just go out and pick whatever works for you best. Finally, get to building it, enter the dev mode, build it, and then think about how you want to automate or implement the backend pieces. You want to do it manually, or you want to do it, automate it. Finally, test it out internally, externally, iterate on the feedback, and so on. And that's it. That's the presentation, just 1 minute above. So I hope I'm able to meet the objective of making you feel comfortable to get started. Of course, I'm here, happy to take questions. But also, lastly, just a quick plug. If you want to be connected to a tech solo founder and meet them on a weekly basis, explore founderverse.online. Let me maybe put a link in the chat here. And yeah, that's it. Open to questions.